In 1971, 24 ordinary college students walked into a basement. None of them had criminal records. None had histories of violence. Every single one had been screened specifically to rule out psychological problems. They were, by every available measure, normal people. Within 6 days, some of them were torturing the others. Nobody told them to. Nobody rewarded them for it. The situation did it on its own. Philip Zimbardo had one question. When people do terrible things, we blame the person. The torturer is a sadist. The collaborator is a coward. The guard who looked away is morally broken. Zimbardo thought we had it wrong. He thought evil wasn't in the person. He thought it was in the situation. And he designed an experiment to prove it. 24 male students, screened for normalcy, randomly divided into two groups. Half became prisoners. Half became guards. The prisoners were arrested at their homes without warning. Real police cars, real handcuffs. Brought to the Stanford basement, stripped, deloused, given smocks and numbers instead of names. The guards were given uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, chosen specifically so prisoners could never make eye contact with them. Wooden batons. One instruction: maintain order. Nothing else. No guidance on how. Just authority and the permission that comes with it. Within hours, the guards began to invent things. Roll calls at 2 a.m. for no reason. Push-ups as punishment. Mattresses taken away. Solitary confinement in a closet. Toilets cleaned by hand. No one told them to do any of this. By day 3, the prisoners were breaking. One had to be released, screaming, rash spreading across his skin, body rejecting the situation his mind couldn't escape. The others went quiet, passive, stopped asserting themselves, even when no one was watching. The guards escalated, each day, slightly further than the day before. This is the part that matters. The guards were not selected for cruelty. They were the same students who had been randomly assigned the other role. A coin flip separated the people being degraded from the people doing the degrading. And almost none of the guards resisted. Some were worse than others. A few were genuinely decent. But the majority moved in one direction, further. They had been given a role. The role came with a logic. The logic had a direction. And they followed it. Zimbardo called it the Lucifer effect. The name comes from the origin of Satan. Lucifer wasn't always the devil. He was the brightest angel in heaven. Something transformed him. Zimbardo's argument was that this transformation is not supernatural. It is not rare. It is a mechanism, and it has 3 components. The first is dehumanization. Numbers instead of names. Uniforms instead of faces. Categories instead of people. This is not incidental to cruelty. It is the prerequisite. You cannot harm someone you still see as fully human. Every documented atrocity in history begins here, the slow administrative removal of the human face from the victim before the harm begins. The prisoners in Stanford wore smocks and numbers from day 1. The guards wore mirrored sunglasses, so no prisoner could ever look them in the eye. The structure was built for dehumanization before a single cruel act occurred. The second is diffusion of responsibility. The guard was following instructions. The officer was implementing policy. The administrator was processing paperwork. Everyone is doing their part. Nobody is doing the whole terrible thing. This is how institutions distribute harm until it becomes weightless. No single person holds enough of it to feel the full moral weight. The system breaks atrocity into small enough pieces that each individual piece feels manageable. The guards at Stanford weren't ordered to be cruel, but they were operating inside a structure that distributed accountability so thinly that cruelty had no clear owner. The third is gradual escalation. Nobody goes from normal to atrocity in a single step. In every documented case of institutional cruelty, there is a ramp, a slightly worse thing each week, a new normal established before the next step is taken. The guards began by being strict. Strictness required enforcement to be credible. Enforcement required escalation to stay effective. Escalation required more escalation to maintain the authority that the first escalation had established. Each step was small. The distance traveled was not. On day 6, a researcher named Christina Maslock visited the experiment. She had not been there for the gradual escalation. She walked in, fresh, and saw prisoners being marched down a corridor with bags over their heads. She turned to Zimbardo and said, "What are you doing to these people?" He shut it down the next day. Maslock is important. Not because she was braver or more moral than anyone else in that basement, but because she was new. The critics came quickly, and they were not wrong. Later researchers found serious problems. Zimbardo himself had been playing a role. The prison superintendent invested in the experiment continuing. Guards had been allegedly encouraged toward harshness by research assistants. Some prisoners reported performing distress rather than experiencing it. The experiment as presented cannot be taken as clean proof. But in 2003, the world produced its own version. Photographs emerged from Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. American soldiers, screened, trained, no history of sadism, were photographing themselves torturing prisoners. The immediate response was to call them bad apples. Zimbardo testified at the trial of one of them. His argument was not that the soldier was innocent. It was that the structure had built conditions, dehumanization of the enemy, diffusion of responsibility up the chain of command, gradual escalation of acceptable treatment, that made this not just possible, but predictable. Nobody had designed Abu Ghraib to produce that outcome. The barrel had. Zimbardo spent his later years on a question that receives far less attention than the experiment itself. If the same mechanisms that produce evil can be documented, can they also be resisted? His answer was yes. But it requires something specific. Not better people. Not stronger willpower in the moment. It requires thinking about it in advance. The people who resisted in the Stanford experiment, the handful of guards who refused to escalate, were not morally superior. They were simply people who, when the pressure arrived, had a prior reference point for what the pressure was trying to do. Zimbardo called it the heroic imagination, not the dramatic act, the refusal to adjust, the maintenance of clarity about what is happening when the situation is engineered to erode that clarity. The Lucifer effect is not a theory about evil people. It never was. It is a theory about what ordinary people become inside structures designed to bring out the worst of them. Which means the question it leaves you with is not, who are the monsters? It is, what are you inside of right now? What role have you been given? What logic does it follow? What direction does it go? And how far down that ramp have you already traveled without noticing?